Jaime Lannister, or the Golden Boy as he's better known throughout this fandom, is going to have a bit of a crazy journey in Game of Thrones Season 8. Just like most characters, he has a bunch of unresolved conflicts and inner turmoil that he needs to get through in these final 6 episodes. In this video, I'm going to discuss one of the most detailed leaks that have ever been sent in regards to Jaime Lannister. Now, as always, these leaks are to be taken with a grain of salt and are more or less for entertainment because a lot of them turn out to be bullshit in the end. But the closer we get to the final season coming out, the more credibility some of these leaks are to be given. So as always, here's your Before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. The last time we saw Jaime Lannister, he was pretty much headed up north. I think we all took away from that the fact that he was going to go and uphold his word that he promised to Jon Snow and Daenerys. He would lend his aid in fighting against the army of the dead and the Night King. Now, I've actually theorized on this channel that Jaime may not head straight north. He may try to convince some people to go and join him. What may be the smartest thing to do would be to double back to King's Landing and try to convince, just as he was doing before Cersei interrupted him and called him the stupidest Lannister ever, and then they had their splitting up. But before that, he was talking with some Lannister soldiers, so I figured the smartest thing for him to do would be to double back and try to convince some of them to join them and then head up north, so that way he doesn't arrive at Winterfell empty-handed. Remember, almost every single Stark that's alive right now hates him for a different reason. Bran for pushing him out the window, although arguably Bran is Bloodraven and the Three-Eyed Crow, so he may not hold on to that resentment. Then you have Jon, Sansa, and Arya, who have all been afflicted by Jaime in different ways. Long story short, it would not be wise for Jaime to go up north and not have any sort of way to aid the good guys and ultimately hopefully redeem himself. Now, this leak that I'm about to discuss continues along with those themes, very similar anyway, and that's why I wanted to bring it up in this video, but let's go ahead and jump into it. Jaime starts the season attempting to recruit Edmure. The roles are reversed and Edmure threatens that Jaime should be slaughtered on sight for what he's done to House Tully. Jaime interrupts him by mentioning that his nieces will surely die if they do not head north and aid Jon. Edmure questions Jaime's motives, mentioning how just not long ago he was willing to start a war for Cersei's cunt, and now he's openly defying her. The scene ends with Edmure receiving word from Sansa, the Lady of Winterfell, that she is seeking support. Edmure's words to Jaime really hit home, and Jaime shows this by removing his golden hand, representing his last bit of Lannister. And then, later on in the season, Tyrion ends up drawing plans for a war fist for Jaime, and it's crafted by Gendry. It's basically a club with spikes that fits over Jaime's nub. So this was like a little side note. Then it picks back up with, after the scene with Edmure, Jaime continues his journey north. In about episode 3, Jaime finally reaches Winterfell and is immediately thrown into a cell. Upon his arrival, with no army, Jon and Daenerys find this extremely suspicious. He explains to them that Cersei will not uphold her into the bargain, and he came to help in the Great War. Daenerys exclaims that this is the man who killed her father in cold blood, and then Bran chimes in with, sometimes the thing one does out of love does not define who they are as a person. Bran explains further that Jaime, like everyone else, has a role to play in the end. The scene ends with Jaime being put in a cell, and shortly after he is visited by Brienne. They have a long conversation about Cersei, the undead, and Daenerys. Jaime says that he was a fool to believe that the Starks would ever trust him. Brienne explains how she will talk to Sansa and explain that you are a changed man and cannot be judged from your past mistakes. Okay, so pausing right there for a second, this leak does mention, very similar to my idea of Jaime sort of seeking aid from those Lannister troops. Instead, this leak has him going to Edmure. Now, honestly, I never really think about that because we weren't really given any spoilers for Edmure Tully filming this season. So when it comes to, theorizing or just making speculation about characters in the future, I don't really have too much on Edmure because as far as we know, he hasn't really filmed anything for season 8. Another sort of gripe I have with this is that Jaime, even though he knows it would be foolish to arrive to Winterfell empty-handed, he does this anyway. Like, he only tries to go and talk to them. Red flags are being raised with that, but I'll continue. Then the plot leak continues on, jumping ahead a little bit, mentioning how at this point in the season, Jaime has been released from his captivity and proved himself during the invasion of Winterfell. He was somehow able to convince the Lannister men that Cersei sent to burn Winterfell to lay down arms and join them. Honestly, the massive army of the dead did most of the convincing since they showed up right as the Golden Company was attacking. Jaime's first scene of episode 4 reveals that he and Brienne shared a tent the night prior. This person mentions that they wasn't shown very much from episode 3, but it's insinuated that they share a love scene, and this scene in episode 4 picks up with the morning after. They appear to be in an encampment outside of King's Landing. Most of Dany's army has been wiped out, but the forces that remain are the strongest in Westeros. Just as Jaime and Brienne share a kiss, there's a massive shriek that can be heard across the sky. The Night King has finally reached King's Landing and begins wreaking havoc across the land. Jaime and Brienne attempt to alert Daenerys and Jon, but it's too late. The dead are being turned all around them. Jaime and Brienne begin fighting them off. Jaime takes out a White Walker with his war fist just as Brienne is fatally stabbed in the chest through a slit in her armor. Brienne drops to the ground in slow motion and Jaime lets out a cry. As soon as her eyes close, they open back up blue. Jaime is clearly distraught, and this causes him to be overwhelmed by a group of whites. And just when you think it's the end, Jon Snow shows up and kills the whites who swarm Jaime. Together they fend them off, but only undead Brienne remains. Jaime stops Jon from engaging and tells him that he must do this. Brienne begins running towards Jaime with glowing blue eyes, and just as Jaime's sword makes contact with her, the camera cuts to black. Okay, now I just want to pause right there for a second. That scene is the reason why I picked the leak to discuss in this video. Jaime and Brienne, their journey has to be connected in some sort of way. I don't really think that as a character, Jaime's going to get a happy ending. What this show has sort of been leading up to is he starts out as a dickhead, then he redeems himself. Then he falls back down that path again, but then he redeems himself. In the end, there's no way the journey is going to be similar to that. It just wouldn't make sense to have a tragic character get a happy ending. When you judge his actions on his past and then these deeds that he's going to take in Game of Thrones Season 8, as well as some of the deeds that he took, post, I say Season 3 is when Jaime really started to become a somewhat good guy. You can't really take those actions and compare them to these future actions in Season 8 because the past is already written. He's still already done the things that he's done. So in my mind, his fate has already been decided, and that will be that he's most likely going to die by the end of this series. Now, I've mentioned this in almost every Jaime video I've done since the information became public. The actor who plays Jaime Lannister, Nikolaj Coster-Waldau, has indeed been paid for all 6 episodes of Game of Thrones Season 8, but he's set to only appear in 4 of those 6 episodes. Now, it's obvious that since he's paid for all 6 episodes, there's a possibility that he could just be in every episode and maybe he dies in the very end. It just doesn't make sense that his call sheet said that he was only going to be appearing in 4 of the 6 final episodes of Game of Thrones. Another thing we have to take into consideration is the fact that I believe it was back in June or July, there was a leaked scene that had come out during the filming process, was outside. There were a bunch of, open spaces, so there were plenty of people who took pictures, but apparently there was a scene that was filmed that involved Jaime being killed by a group of whites during the Siege of Winterfell, which according to the actor who plays the Night King, that battle was going to be in the 3rd part of the season, is going to take up the large majority of an entire episode. So there's a chance that Jaime could die in this episode, but the fact that this leak brings up Jaime having to sacrifice Brienne after Brienne is turned into a white, now that is unique. Now before I finish up with the rest of this leak, I just want to reiterate that this is a load of horseshit and is to most likely be taken with a grain of salt. The stories that these person gives me when they send me these messages over on Twitter, speaking of which, make sure you go follow me at Sir_Hunts, but most of the backstory that they give me to go along with the information they're presenting is insanely stupid 90% of the time. But this person mentioned that they were a part of a group of 30 individuals who were given a little bit of privy to the new season. They said they're working on the trailer right now, which is going to be coming out right around mid to late January. And because of this, the restrictions on the flow of information about Game of Thrones are starting to loosen up. And they also mentioned that be prepared for the next coming weeks. There's most likely, in months even, there's most likely going to be an insane amount of leaks that are going to start dropping, especially after that trailer hit. But anyway, that aside, continuing on with the leak here, in the end, Jaime and Jon both survive the battle and grow a bit closer because of it. They share a conversation similar to Season 1, but with mutually newly found respect. Jon asks Jaime what will they do about his sister, and Jaime mentions how the only thing that will stop Cersei is death. The Siege of King's Landing, this is like starting a new paragraph, the Siege of King's Landing takes all of 5 minutes. Sandor and Arya are able to take out the mountain after losing a few good men in the process, and Cersei is then quickly captured. Jaime visits with her in her cell and mentions how she will finally pay for her crimes against the Seven Realms. He's extremely cold to her at first, but she is able to get through to him somewhat. The next scene involves Cersei confessing to her crimes, but claims that everyone present at her trial is guilty of the same things. She demands a trial by combat and is granted this. Daenerys then reveals that her champion will be fire. Just then, Drogon swoops down and opens up his mouth with flames building inside. Jaime begins to run towards Cersei and makes it just in time to get caught up in the flames. Both Lannisters die immediately, and the camera pans slowly up from their charred corpses. Now, I'm not gonna lie, fake or not, that would be one hell of an ending for Jaime and Cersei. I wouldn't mind it if Jaime survives until the very end. I just don't think he will. Like I mentioned earlier, he's a tragic character, so there's no way his journey is going to give him somewhat of a happy ending. And if Brienne doesn't exist in that world, well, I'm sure Jaime, after, realizing that Cersei is not who she thought he was, and he pretty much loved her his whole life, Jaime will probably won't want to exist in this new world that's going to be going forward. So having him go out with Cersei one last time, because in the books he mentions that him and Cersei were brought into this world together, and they will most likely leave together. This is why a lot of people think he's going to be the Valonqar. But having Jaime have an ending like that, I would sure as hell love to see in Game of Thrones Season 8. You guys let me know your thoughts about this leak down below. Do you see Jaime having to kill an undead Brienne, or do you see Jaime going out with Cersei in one last hurrah? That being said, alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. Also, super special shout out to every single person watching this video right now. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts, keeping you entertained throughout this long night's reviews.